I'm here with Diana Roten today. We're talking about DML. And, well, I wanted to start out just really generally framing this idea of the educational technology approach and the digital media and learning approach, their differences and complementarities.
Absolutely. So I'm not sure that these are formalized differences between the concepts in the field, but this is a little bit of how I've been looking at the market for a while. And what we see is that there was in the late 80s, maybe even beginning in the 70s, there was this movement around what we call the ed tech movement. And that largely came out of school-based reform um, efforts at the time. And if you think about what technology was at the time, we had just gotten personal computing, but we were still really working with large scale infrastructure technologies. So the ed tech reform movement in the 20th century really focused on building technologies that could increase the efficiencies of running institutions, schools, and institutions of higher education. So these might have been instructional hardware programs to increase standardized test scores, administrative technology to facilitate record keeping, management systems, large scale learning and content management systems. What we started to see emerging in the 21st century, just in the transition of the 21st century, and largely driven by new cutting edge research in the behavioral and social sciences, as well as some of the decreasing production and development costs around technology, was that the notion that learning happens through a variety of different social experiences in a variety of different contexts, including school, but well beyond school. And sort of as a result of the confluence between those research results and the changing costs of development, we started to see the emergence rather of more digital media and learning tools, products, and services. And these are really designed to increase the efficacy of one's learning rather than focusing on advancing the efficiency of schooling. And so you see more web and mobile-based products that are designed to promote peer-to-peer learning, anywhere, anytime learning, blended learning experiences, and social and geo-locative learning experiences. And in my opinion, these two different approaches to the question of the role of technology in innovating education are not just about perceptions of the differences in technologies, but really about the differences in what they conceive to be the pedagogies and the epistemologies of learning. And I think that's a conversation that we haven't fully unpacked. There's been a number of conferences in the last 12 to 16 months which have focused on innovation in education, and many of those have focused on the role of technology. I've been to a lot of them. I even hosted a few of them. But I think we've always assumed in those conversations that we're talking about the same end goals and the same innovation pathways towards those end goals. And I'm not so sure that's necessarily true.
So, why do you think that there's urgency around this conference's primary theme?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do in this conference is sort of say, hold on. Let's unpack our assumptions here. Before we start talking about what technology can do to innovate education, let's back up what seems to some maybe a really fundamental step, but I think one we need to unpack today, which is what are the primary practices and purposes of learning? Where does it happen? How does it happen? And what can technology do to accelerate those practices, processes, and eventually the outcomes that we perceive as being valuable? So we're trying to back the conversation up to that point in this event in March, and then say, okay, we may have some differences of opinions around these core interpretations of education and learning, but are we in conflict with one another, or are we in complementarity with one another? It's my opinion that this is a very large-scale problem, and the notion of innovating a system or an ecosystem of education and learning is going to require the participation and the contributions of both perspectives. But we need to understand where we can be most effective in working together to sort of create that ecosystem of connected learning.
Okay, so focusing in a little bit more, what was the thinking behind the selection of the call topics for the conference?
Sure. So if you think about this challenge as one really about large scale innovation, a broad rethinking and a bold redesigning of education and learning, you need to think about all the components of innovation and all the dimensions of which a system operate on. So that would include the practices and philosophies of education and learning, the people and the institutions where education and learning happen and by whom, the content and experience of education and learning, and then the access and outcomes to and of education and learning. So what we tried to do was think about if those are the critical dimensions and components of a system and areas around which we need to innovate, rather than just picking one particular niche of this system, what are the key topics within those large buckets? And so we put together our call topics, which are around making and tinkering, to the practices and philosophies. How do we democratize participation and innovation in learning through people and institutions? How do we reimagine the content, context, and experience through media? And then what are the innovations for public education? I think to go back to the tension that I think we're setting up in this conference, many of the conversations in the newer digital media learning conversation have been outside of the school system. And how do we bring that very innovative thinking and practice into the school system? Because today, at least for the near future, that is where the majority of our youth learn, and we need to focus some of the innovative effort directly there.
So, given this kind of broad and inclusive frame, who do you think ought to come to the conference, and why?
So, we've thought hard about this. This is, the third year of the Digital Media Learning Conference, and it's going to be a big year given that it's being hosted in San Francisco. I think we've done very well historically in attracting researchers and increasingly technologists to the conference. We opened it up a bit more last year to the sort of practitioners and teachers who are working in these various environments in school and out of school. And this year, we'd like to keep that constituent base growing. And we'd also like to ensure that we get some of those Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and some of those capital investors, because it really is a conversation amongst all of these stakeholders. If you're going to build a very big innovation play in a large-scale, multifaceted system like we're talking, you need to be able to press on all those pain points. And so we're really seeking to create a diversified audience and to really be provocative in the session so that, again, to go back, some of these assumptions that are unspoken in previous contexts. We really want to get these different stakeholders talking to each other about what it is they experience in their practice and what it is they see from their perspective of investing, so we can start figuring out how to do this in a collaborative fashion.
That seems particularly important from where I sit in the Bay Area, because I haven't seen a great deal of connection between the education-based and learning-based community and the very rich collection of startups and larger institutions who are looking particularly at online learning from a commercial aspect. So this, as far as I know, is the first attempt to bring all of those players together to talk about the mutual landscape, I think.
It couldn't be more important. I think there's no other market in which products are built without really significant user input. And if we don't start doing that in this sector, we're failing, the teachers and the students and the parents who are intended to be the direct beneficiaries of all this entrepreneurial activity. So, yeah, I think it's a really important marriage to start to broker.
So given what we've spoken about, what are your thoughts on the selection and the makeup of the conference committee and the keynote?
Great. So in the same way that we hope for a diversified audience, we thought, who could really represent the different perspectives of key stakeholders involved in this sector, we formed a committee that reflects that same diversification. So we have a very talented game designer, Tracy Fullerton, Mitch Resnick, who comes from the world of building and developing technologies with a long view of this sector from when it was the ed technology community to now being a member of the digital media and learning community, to practitioners on the ground. Antero Garcia has, he's young and he has an enormous investment in this from a practitioner standpoint, and an already long, for a early tenured scholar, long research view of the question. And finally, Mark Surman comes from this from a perspective of knowing technology inside and out, but more importantly, really knowing what it takes to build an innovative infrastructure to support what is inherently going to have to be creative collaboration for us to turn the corner and rethink this system. And then, of course, our keynote, John Seely Brown, better than anyone I know, could set up the tension between what is the future of education and how do we think about it, both from a school-based perspective as well as understanding how this is an in-school and out-of-school challenge. And JSB comes at this topic not only from understanding that tension, but understanding how to look at that tension from the role of a researcher, from an investor, from a practitioner, and just a general thought leader in the field.
What concrete outcomes would you like to see coming out of the conference?
Well, I think this is probably not concrete, but I really do, what I really hope happens in this conference, and this may just be because I like to be provocative, but I think we're at a critical juncture. And what I know of having tried to address the question of reform and innovation and redesign in this field from a variety of different seats, wearing a variety of different hats, no one can do this alone. No matter how large that stakeholder group is, they cannot do this alone. And we need to be able to get into the same room, understand each other's perspectives, respect each other's perspectives, accept the tension, and then figure out how to operate like any healthy ecosystem, which requires a variety of different specializations working to provide services to one another. And I think we have to initiate that kind of crosstalk. And that's one, again, perhaps not entirely concrete, but very critical objective of the conference. Concretely, what I hope that leads to, as we've heard this conversation for a number of years, it remains ever more important in our current economic context. We have to really think hard about public-private partnerships and how to support this new ecosystem. I think, given that this event will be happening in the Valley, I can't think of a better place in which those conversations could not only happen, but actually turn into real commitments of action that can be taken between private capital, private actors, public actors. And so I hope to set up a number of conversations in the event that will lead to concrete agreements of that type.
Wonderful. This frames the conference really well, and I hope attracts some people who might not otherwise have decided to come. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you.